Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Let's launch into a new episode of Rock and Read. Ready or not, today we'll read Chapter 8 of Red by the Red Rocker Sammy Hagar. Chapter 8 is called OU812. Here we go. As soon as we finished the first tour, I had to make the solo record for Geffen. That was the deal he had made with Warner Brothers. We were worried about Eddie and his drinking and drug problem, but first we had to deal with his brother. We put Al in rehab as soon as the tour was over. His wife staged an intervention. I didn't even know what an intervention was. It was hairy. I cried. It broke me down, and I wasn't even the guy under the gun. They went and got him out of bed 6 o'clock in the morning before he had another drink. He was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, chugging a bottle of vodka, and going back to bed. He wasn't a sipper. He wasn't a nurser. He just plowed himself to the point of passing out. We put him in the hospital. He took the oath and never drank again. I love Al. He is the strongest guy, but weird. He's a chain smoker, but he'd quit smoking every Monday for the one day just to torture himself. Al's the kind of guy that I'd call every day just a bull. Once Al cleaned up, Eddie didn't have anybody to drink with. Al still smoked. Al would drink coffee, Eddie would drink beer and do a few other things. It was Loeffler's idea to have Eddie co-produce my solo record and play bass. He always played bass with Van Halen, 2 or 3 songs on practically every record. He was a great bass player. Eddie's a great musician, period. So off we went into the studio with Jesse Harms on keyboards, David Losser on drums, and Eddie on bass. I played guitar. That way we'd keep Eddie busy. We cut that record at these brand new studios A&M Records built in Hollywood, where Tom Petty, John Cougar Mellencamp, and Stevie Nicks all had been working. Pink Floyd was in the room next door, without Roger Waters doing Learn to Fly. Eddie and I would ride in together from the beach every day in a different car. I had about 7 Ferraris down there. The Pink Floyd drummer, Nick Mason, is a big Ferrari collector. The guitarist David Gilmour owns Ferraris too, but he's not in Nick Mason's class as a collector. Mason owns one of the original Ferrari GTOs, a car probably worth $30 million. They didn't have their cars with them, so they'd be waiting on the sidewalk every day to see what I was going to be driving. David Gilmour is one of my all-time guitar heroes, and it was really cool having those guys admiring my cars every day. I was showing off. After I'd run through all the cars I'd had down south, I sent Bucky back up to Mill Valley to swap out a couple more cars. Pink Floyd was auditioning drummers for a shuffle they couldn't nail, even with their drummer Nick Mason there. They had Omar Hakim trying out, fresh from Sting's band, but they didn't use him on the track. I did. He overdubbed drums on a couple cuts of my album. Pink Floyd was so particular about that shuffle, they were still working on it by the time I finished my entire album. MTV did a whole name the album promotion because I couldn't go on tour. I was just going to call it Sammy Hagar, but some fans submitted the title, I Never Say Goodbye, with a note saying, Sammy's left his solo career, but he never said goodbye. The record went platinum immediately. Give to Live and Eagles Fly off the album were big hits. I did a 3-week promotional tour around the world, San Francisco to Japan to Germany, came home and went straight into the studio to start the new Van Halen album, OU812. As soon as I came back home, I flew down to Los Angeles from San Francisco. Eddie and Al met me at the airport. I hadn't even seen them for a couple weeks. I was really happy to see them. When we got in the car, Eddie and Al lit up cigarettes in the front seat and snapped a cassette in the player. We want you to hear something, Eddie said. They played me the keyboard part for When It's Love. I was covered in goosebumps. That was almost the inspiration for the whole album. We knocked that song out, and I knew we had something. The songs were not my best stuff lyrically. Black and Blue was kind of quirky, cool groove, and phrasing, but the lyrics were a little too 80s. Source of Infection, ugh. The last song we wrote was Finish What You Started. It was toward the end of the project, and we needed another song or two. Ed was the best at taking an idea you gave him and turning it into something special, something unique. I told him we should do something like The Who's Magic Bus, something with a lot of rhythm and acoustic guitars. Van Halen hadn't really done anything with acoustic guitars. I was in Malibu lying in bed with my wife about to get some when I heard Eddie outside my door. Not even my front door, but the beach entrance directly under my bedroom deck. I could see him out there, cigarette glowing in the dark, no shirt, acoustic guitar around his neck, bottle of Jack Daniels in his hand. "Ed, what?" I said. "Come on, man, I've got this idea," he said. "Ed, it's 2 o'clock in the morning," I said. "I'm tired." "The old lady kicked me out," he said. "Come on, man, let me in." I went down. Betsy was pissed, but what could I do? He was my best friend and creative partner. She turned out the light. I wouldn't let him in because he's got his cigarette, so we sat on the porch. He started playing me the riff for Finish What You Started, and right away, I got excited. I went and got my acoustic and started doing my Tony Joe White thing. I was still thinking about going back upstairs and getting laid, and started singing, "Come on, baby, finish what you started." It never happened. Eddie and I saw the sun come up and I threw him out, but we had written just about the whole thing. I was imagining what was going to happen to me when I went back upstairs. That song is about unfulfilled sex. It took a while to do OU812, more than it probably should have. Sober, Al played different. It was really weird. He wasn't as good. When he was drinking, Al was always a radical drummer. He'd hit hard and do crazy fills. Drunk, he was off the hook. But sober, he was a lot more conservative. His timing was better, but he wasn't as radical. In the end, it was easy to put aside things like that because everybody was still getting along really good. The only problem was that I was starting to burn out, getting a little crispy around the edges. Betsy, on the other hand, was losing it. I'd come off the VOA tour, jumped into 5150, did the album and the tour, did my solo record, went around the world on the promotional tour, and straight back into the studio for OU812. And now we were going back out on the road. She was crying, depressed all the time. Life was not good at home. I was not ignoring it any longer. Now, I was concerned. I went to Ed Leffler and suggested we do stadiums. We were the biggest band in the world, and as it was, we were selling out 4 nights in arenas anywhere. Stadiums would allow us to go out for a couple months instead of a year, and if things went right, we'd end up making way more money. Leffler thought it was a gamble, but worth taking. We put together a bill. Kingdom Come was a new band from Germany that everyone thought was going to be big. The Germans sounded exactly like Led Zeppelin, but they told interviewers they had never heard of the band. So, they were history before they were out of the blocks, but they opened. Metallica, who went on second, had been my choice. They were a new band from the Bay Area, young and hip. Dokken, the third act, was ready to break up when the tour started, and following Metallica every night finished them. They broke up at the end of the tour. The Scorpions were also on that tour, and they mean a lot. We called the tour Monsters of Rock, and did 27 shows between Memorial Day and the end of July 1988. We had 56 trucks, 3 complete stages, and production systems that all had to be put up at the same time so we could go out and play 3 shows a week. It cost $350,000 per show, and it was easy to lose money. The shows broke even at 44,000 tickets, and the tickets were expensive. But the fact that OU812 went straight to number 1 made selling tickets easier. It went on to sell 4 million records, and had the big hits When It's Love and Finish What You Started. Meanwhile, that tour made a lot of money, even if it didn't do so hot in some places. We sold out 2 Detroits. We sold out 2 Texas Jams. Sold out Candlestick Park in San Francisco. We sold out a couple of New Yorks. But in Miami, we did around 25,000 people, and a hurricane blew in and ripped the concert to shreds. We'd have to stop in the middle. Big loss. We had a couple other markets where it didn't do so good, and we ended up giving a lot of the money back to the promoters. It wasn't a disaster, far from it, but it wasn't the home run we expected. On the first song, opening night, I fell on a metal step. Everything had been running late, and we didn't have a full production run through the day before like we normally would. The stage was done barely in time for us to play on it. I didn't know the stage. I tripped and landed right on my tailbone. Spent the whole night after the first show in the hospital. I was getting steroids shot into my ass every day for my broken tailbone. I was getting massages, and I had to sit on ice packs. I had a grapefruit on my lower vertebrae. On days off, I flew home to see my doctor. On one of those trips back, I hobbled into the waiting room, and there was Miles Davis sitting in a chair. The doctor opened the door, and out comes Sting and his wife, Trudy. "Look, it's Sammy Hagar," Sting says. They left, and the doctor said, "Sammy, have you met Miles?" Miles Davis, sitting there dressed like a woman in his shiny, crazy-ass clothes, skinny cornrows in his hair. Miles puts his hand out without standing up, and as I reach to shake his hand, he reaches out with his other hand around my forearm. He pulls himself to his feet. He's using me to get up out of the chair. I almost went down with him. I had an ear infection. I had a sinus infection. I had a broken tailbone. That whole tour, I couldn't sing because of my sinuses. Every night, I couldn't sing. It was too big of a deal to cancel because it was so expensive. We got to Texas, standing out in front of 60,000 people at the Cotton Bowl, and I couldn't sing. I was about to cry on stage. Texas was my country. I owed Texas. I was a headliner there long before Van Halen. I stopped in the middle of the first song. "I can't sing," I said. "I promise you, Van Halen will come back and do a free concert for Dallas." We cut the show short, and the brothers went nuclear on me afterward. They crucified me for that. It was 3 years before we made good. Earlier that day at the Cotton Bowl, we'd had an opening band called Crocus, who was handled by Butch Stone, a southerner I knew from Montrose, days when he managed Black Oak, Arkansas. They planned to broadcast their set live on the radio, but Ed Leffler pulled the plug on them. Butch was really upset. There was a screaming match. That night at the hotel after the bar closed, somebody jumped Leffler in the elevator and beat the out of him. Knocked out a couple teeth, broke some ribs, really busted Ed up. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Still, we rolled along. I told Betsy I was only going out for 1 month, but we came back and Leffler started talking about going back out to hit the other markets. The band had me in the back seat of a car, coming back from some press function. Ed and I were drinking and doing coke, and they started drilling on me. With Al sober, he couldn't sit around the house all day. "I need a life," he told me. Eddie liked to be on the road too. He and his brother would have played 7 nights a week if they could. They were really pressuring me. "I just can't do it," I told them. "I love you guys, but I'm going to lose my marriage. I'm going to lose my family. It isn't worth it to me." It wasn't like a fight, but we were bickering. "We got you in the band. We thought you were committed," Alex said. "If we would have known this, we would have gotten somebody else." Alex sober was a head tripper. Drunk, he was just tripped out. Eddie would always back him, no matter what. You could not come between those two guys in a million years. They're not just brothers. They came from another country, didn't speak English when they got here, and were tight. They'd fight like a cat and dog. But don't get between them. The brothers decided that Mike Anthony wasn't making enough of a contribution to continue earning a full share of the music publishing. Truthfully, Mikey didn't write. Ever. He basically played on bass what Eddie would tell him. He was a quick study and he would add to what he was given. Mike was a creative bass player. He had an incredible background voice that made a big difference in the sound of Van Halen, but the brothers needed money. Al was almost broke. We were making tons of money, but Al was many $1 million in debt. Leffler helped consolidate his bills and arranged a 5-year window with him just playing interest. He had a little real estate cash. He'd bought a $2 million house that he sunk even more millions into for rock star junk like a rubber room and then sold it for a big loss. He was making really bad deals. We held a meeting and took a vote on reducing Mike's partnership to 10%. Leffler and I voted no, but Mickey sided with the Van Halens and voted against himself, 3-2. "I understand what you're saying," he said, "and I'm okay with it." I knew going back out was inevitable. We spent fall 1988 on the road. We didn't do as hard a tour. We went back to some of the markets that we'd canceled. We went to some of the secondary markets we missed, trying to keep the record alive and make up for the bad press from the Monsters tour. Everybody thought it bombed. It really didn't. We made a lot of money and we took care of everybody. No one lost money, but attendance wasn't what it was supposed to be. We were also doing whatever we could to pump album sales, which were again great, but not where they were supposed to be. As a result, we started making music videos. For 5150, Van Halen made no videos. Ed Loeffler figured that he didn't want to compete with old Van Halen videos. Also, Warner Brothers refused to pay for the videos, and they could be expensive. When we put out the first single, When It's Love, from OU812 without a video too, Warner started to freak out. They thought if we'd put out a video with 5150, instead of selling 7 million, we would have sold 10 million. We were already out on tour when the second OU812 single, When It's Love, came out, and Warner finally agreed to pay for the video. Loeffler insisted it be a performance video, no acting. It needed to be shot on one of our off days from the tour. They sent the Warner jet for us, flew us to Hollywood. We spent 12 hours shooting the video, and I blew out my voice. At 2 in the morning, they loaded us back onto the jet and sent us back to the next town on the tour. They had shot some B-roll with an actor and actress, and she was around for the shoot, wiping down the bar in the background of the shot or some such. We really connected, but I never even got the chance all day to take her in the back room. The second video was Finish What You Started, where director Andy Morahan wanted to shoot everybody individually. He wanted to make sure everybody looked good all the time, and you can never do that with 4 guys all at once. Someone always gets caught with his eyes crossed, his finger in his nose, his chin doubled. Loeffler insisted on another performance video again. They shot us in a high contrast black and white against a white backdrop. We each played the song for about 3 hours. When we walked in, the place looked like the men's department at Macy's. There were so many racks of clothes. We wore what we were wearing. We didn't let the stylist touch our hair or do our makeup. A lady put a little powder on, and that was it. We would see all these dolled up blow-dry bands on MTV and laugh at the holes. We weren't going to do that. We went and did those extra 4 months worth of shows, but by the time I came back home, my marriage was coming apart. Betsy was getting a distant look in her eye. I started worrying about her. Al's marriage was also falling to pieces, and the 4 months on the road didn't do that any good either. With Al sober and Eddie still up all the time, they were fighting like crazy. We broke up fights constantly over stupid things. Hey Ed, you got a cigarette? Hey Al, why don't you buy your own cigarettes? Hey, you man. Well, you. Boom. They just go at it because he asked for a cigarette. There was always tension between them. When they didn't want us to know what they were arguing about, they would shout at each other in Dutch. We didn't sell out everywhere on the second leg. We still did big business, but we were doing 8,000 out of 12,000 seats and 12,000 out of 15,000 instead of 2 or 3 sold-out nights. Some cities it was always there. Others we had to work harder for. Even though the OU812 album sold 4 million, people thought it wasn't successful since 5150 had sold 7 million, almost twice as many. Maybe the honeymoon's over. Big pressure on me now. Now we got to do a great record and go out and tour the rest of the world. We hadn't toured the world yet. I was resisting. I didn't want to go. That's when Betsy had her nervous breakdown. It all went down shortly after I bought this airplane, a Merlin 3, and started spending a lot of time in Mexico. We had used it a few times, and I decided to buy it. A 7-passenger twin turboprop, small and fast, the biggest plane you can have with one pilot. I was stretching a little bit buying this plane. I could afford it, but it was a very big luxury. I redid the interior with all this white and beige, cream-colored leather and suede. I put in a flushing toilet. I had a seat that folded down into a double bed so that the kids could sleep. The first trip we took on this new plane to Mexico, Betsy kind of freaked out. We arrived and she was all nervous. She couldn't sleep and started shaking, getting really bad anxiety and panic attacks. With us was Bucky's ex-wife Joel, and they were divorced by then. Bucky had been living with their son Benny, and Joel was working for us as a nanny. We had to leave Mexico because Betsy was feeling terrible. We got on the airplane. We were cruising at 26,000 feet, halfway up the middle of Baja, when she started screaming and pulling her hair out. She tried to open the door and jump out of the plane. Aaron wasn't with us. Andrew was. He was a baby about 2 years old, sleeping. Joel had me hold down Betsy, and I yelled at the pilot to land. He told me that I did not want to land in the middle of nowhere in Mexico with a crazy woman on the plane. You gotta let me try to get to San Diego, he said. I had some booze on the plane, and Betsy was willing to drink it at this stage. She never drank, did drugs, anything. But she was freaking out so badly she couldn't breathe. I poured tequila down her throat while Joel held the baby's ears. Betsy finally calmed down. She passed out. She was drunk. When we got to San Diego, I hired a car to drive her to Malibu. We were originally on our way home to San Francisco, but we had our house in Malibu. I took Andrew with me on the plane, and she and Joel went by limo to Malibu. Joel was her good friend. She really took care of her. By the time she got to Malibu, Betsy was in bad shape. I called the doctor, and he came straight over. He gave her shots that calmed her down. He told me that she was having a panic attack. I had never even heard of a panic attack. There was a psychiatrist who lived across the street. He started coming over to her house for an hour or two every day. He put her on Prozac, Anax, every kind of antidepressant, mood-enhancing drug you can take. Betsy had never taken drugs in her life. I had 24-hour nurses. I couldn't leave her. I couldn't even go to the grocery store. If I told her I was going to the store, she would fall on the floor and curl up into a little ball. I was the only one who could bring her out of these trances. We'd try to pry her open, get her off the floor, put her on the couch. Her pupils would dilate, and she stared straight ahead at nothing. Nobody else could talk her down. I had to be around. I held a meeting with the guys in Van Halen. I told them I cannot go in the studio. I cannot go on tour. I got to get my wife healed. We took a year off in between the OU812 tour and for unlawful carnal knowledge. Ed Leffler and I both believe that time off was good for a band who had been in everybody's face so hard for so long. Promoters, record companies, everybody involved with making money off you will tell you to stay out there while you're on top. They tell you the public forgets real fast. They don't. The Stones prove it every time they go out. Pink Floyd waited as long as they wanted to go back out. It's the bands that tour that go down. Pretty soon nobody wants to see them anymore after they've seen them 20 times the last 2 years. Eddie didn't like being home, not doing anything. I was watching over Betsy every night, every day. Ed and Al were really putting pressure on me. They would be writing and come up with something cool like Pound Cake. I would hear what they were doing and really wanted to be working on it. I'd go in for a day or two. We finally went in the studio to make the next album for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. We wanted that Led Zeppelin sound, so we went to Andy Johns, the British engineer who had worked on the original Led Zeppelin albums. Too bad he was so trashed. He and Eddie were up most of the time. We would start around noon because I wanted to be home by dinner time to help Betsy. Making that album was kind of like pulling teeth. Betsy was under 24-hour care, and the situation at home was tense. I was trying to stretch out the process. Not because I was being lazy. I wanted the album to be great, and I wanted to be there as much as possible. But with all the problems at home, there were days I couldn't go to the studio. Eddie and Al were there night and day, every day. They started hammering me a little bit about not being there. Eddie would call up and say, "We need you. When are you going to be able to come in?" I'd go in for a couple days, sometimes a week straight, and sometimes I couldn't come at all. I'd bring music home and listen, but it's really hard to concentrate when your wife is curled up in a ball on the floor, crying. Andy Johns was a disaster, but Eddie protected him. With Al sober, Eddie needed a new partner in crime, and that was Andy. He was bombed a lot of the time. He crashed his car into the studio wall. I was not happy with the situation. There started to be a little tension. Then Eddie erased one of my vocals. That was it. I wasn't working with that guy anymore. I stormed out of the studio. "Samster, come on, mate," Andy said. "Just one more time." "You, Andy, that's it," I told him. "I'm done with your ass." It was hard enough getting a vocal with him because he was so disruptive and didn't pay attention. I threw Andy Johns out, and I brought back Ted Templeman, who not only produced Montrose and my VOA album, but handled the early albums with Van Halen when Roth was still in the band. Eddie and Ted didn't get along, and Ted had badmouthed us when we had originally formed before 5150. Still, Ted came in and did all the vocals with me on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, and helped with the mix. He saved the day for me. The title was my idea. Around this time, the Florida rap group 2 Live Crew raised the issue of censorship in the record business. People kept asking us to take a stand. I thought, not to get all political, that we should call the next record Censorship. Leffler thought chain stores would refuse to carry a record with that title. Van Halen, the biggest band in the world? Every album #1? They're going to do something. Stuff the thing in a brown paper bag, something, anything. They're going to figure out some way to sell the record, those greedy. At the time, Ray Boom Boom Massini, the former lightweight champ, had been training me. He came over a couple times a week and put a 100-pound bag of sand on my back and made me run up and down the 77 steps that went down to my beach from my house. I was playing him some of the stuff, and he asked what we were going to call the album. Censorship, I said. Oh, wow, man, he said, for unlawful carnal knowledge? I'd never heard that before, so he told me that in medieval days when a woman was caught cheating, they'd lock her up in the town square and hang a sign around her neck that said F-U-C-K, for unlawful carnal knowledge. My mom told me that when I was in school, he said. First time I said. Pound Cake, the first single from the album, was a great video. #1 on MTV Rock Video of the Year in 1991 from Playboy magazine. We spent around $400,000 on that video, which had a ton of hot babes in it. That was the peak of MTV and the music video form and people spending money on them. When I first saw the treatment to the video for Right Now, the next single from the album, I thought it looked like a terrible idea. That was the first serious lyric I had written for Van Halen, a big statement. All I could see was some of the director's lines like, I'll wrestle you for food, or right now someone's walking on a beach for the first time. I read his treatment and without seeing the video, thought he was nuts. This song was my baby. I went around in circles with Eddie and Al for 6 months on this. It was the last song we recorded for the album. I had these lyrics, but Eddie couldn't relate to what I was trying to say, and he didn't have any music that worked. I had been pumping these guys for months while we were playing video games or eating. Right now, it's your tomorrow. Right now, it's everything. But nobody was getting it. One day during a break, I heard Eddie fooling around on the piano in the other room. I went running in. That's it! That's it! I said. I played this for you on the last album and you didn't dig it, said Eddie. It fit like a glove. He didn't have to rewrite anything. If Eddie had gone off and played video games instead, or if I'd sat down and started making phone calls like I usually did on breaks, it would have never happened. I felt protective of the song. I did not want to do the dumb video. The Warner Brothers brass tracked me down in Hawaii. They were trying hard to convince me. I told them, okay, but let me and Al come up with the script. This director had scenes in his treatment like me looking in a mirror with a poster of the old Van Halen in it, while it says, right now, Dave wishes he was Sammy. Ho 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 ho! We started writing together and began coming up with some pretty good lines. I still wasn't convinced, but I started to feel enthusiasm stirring. When it came time to shoot, however, we were in Chicago in the dead of winter, stuck inside a blizzard. I had been ill with pneumonia and forced to cancel 2 shows. I had been trapped in a hotel room for days, sick, in a bad mood, and pissed off. The director was so vague with us. Just stand over here. And I couldn't see the point of anything he was doing. At the end, there's a shot in there where I'm folding my arms, standing there looking disgusted. I was just throwing my arms in the air and he shot it and put it in the video. At the end of the day, I had 102 temperature and was dying. I walked out of the warehouse we were shooting into the bathroom we used as a dressing room. The guy with the camera followed me all the way. When I reached the door, I turned around and gave the cameraman a dirty look and slammed the door in his face, and it goes men on the door. That's the way the video ends. Mark Finsk, the director, was a great artist. It was the biggest video of our career, one of the biggest MTV videos of all time, and Crystal Pepsi paid us $2 million to use it as a soda pop commercial. I can't believe all these people had to beat me up so bad before I caved in, but the treatment really was bad. The video was brilliant. Meanwhile, Betsy was back home, giddy happy. She was getting better. They put her on drugs and she snapped out of it, started doing real good. She lost a lot of weight. Betsy wasn't hugely overweight, but like any woman who's had a couple kids, she had to struggle with her weight. The drugs slimmed her down. I was ready to start taking them. I was running every day on the beach or riding my bicycle into Santa Monica and back. She had her roses and her horses. Betsy was a Beatrix Potter kind of girl. She started taking tennis lessons. I should have been happy, but instead I was going in my head, I am over this. She had worn me out. I was done with that marriage. I wasn't going to leave her. I was going to make sure she was okay, but I was over it. In that first year, she had worn me out. Every night I had to hold her and rock her to sleep in bed. I had to feed her. I had to make sure she ate. To me, it was like having an invalid child. When she was on her medication, she was doing great, riding horses, playing tennis, walking on the beach, and just being a normal person, like she had never been since I had met her. I was glad for her, but she had been holding me down so hard for so long. She didn't remember who she was. During that year, she was all broken down, really in trouble, in and out of mental hospitals. She forgot who she was. When she started taking Prozac and came out of her trance, she came back and was this happy person, living in this beautiful house in Malibu with nice cars, horses, and money to burn. She flat didn't remember anything. She became like a shopaholic. She had clothes in the closet, expensive designer sweaters and gowns, things that she wouldn't wear in a million years, things that she had just bought and shelved. She put something like $1 million on her credit card that year. It didn't even register. Once she had leveled out, Betsy went back to wanting me to quit the business, especially since my other businesses were continuing to do well. She needed something to distract her. I told her to go find a realtor and look at property. She had a $2 million budget. I knew that would keep her busy. She ended up buying a house in Carmel by Big Sur. All Betsy ever had wanted in life was to live in Big Sur. One time, maybe 10 years earlier, we were at the Highlands Inn in Carmel, and I was jogging through the neighborhood. I ran past the coolest houses I had ever seen. Right on the cliff, waves splashing into the windows, it was a Frank Lloyd Wright type house that looked like an upside-down boat. It had this big copper roof with this big spine on the top like the keel of a boat. I took Betsy to see it, and she didn't even notice it because of some Stony Brook castle across the street. It was just as well. I had never dug it there. Too big, spacey, heavy, lonely for me. We'd go down there from time to time and spend a week hiking and sitting there looking at the ocean, but it never felt like a place I could be in regularly. Anyway, 10 years later, Betsy was on her home search when she called to say she found a place. We drove down and it was the same house I tried to show her 10 years before. We bought it and Betsy threw a fortune in the place, totally doing it up. Unfortunately, it didn't change things much. She was busy, sure, but the situation between us was as strained as ever. Our relationship was over, but I didn't feel like I could leave her because of the history. I had been in this position before and wanted to leave Betsy a couple times, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. It was like, I can't live with this anymore. So many people go through that and stay together. They just learn to live separately for the rest of their lives in separate bedrooms or whatever. We were still sexually active, so we weren't sleeping in separate bedrooms. But the only thing that was left in our relationship was sex, our kids, and an empire. We had houses, businesses, and cars. The thought of divorce was ugly. I'd never have gone through it if I had known how ugly it really was. It wasn't just the unpleasantness of the divorce, though. I just didn't want to leave her. I still cared about her. I'm the kind of person who can put my head in the sand pretty good, as well as put my head in the clouds as good as anybody too. I'm really optimistic about everything I do in life. I don't believe there's a downside to anything when I go into things. I've been let down a few times, believe me, but it doesn't destroy my optimism. I figured things were just going to get better. I was so busy all the time in my brain, it barely mattered. Once I knew that she was okay and that she could be by herself, I decided I was willing to stick it out. I'd go back out on tour as much as I could and just keep around and get out of the house whenever possible. I envisioned her getting better, maybe, but not in our relationship. I didn't think that was ever going to come back around. It wasn't even on top of my list. I was worn out from that year of taking care of her. I wasn't going to put more effort into it now, or try to make this relationship happen like I'd done a year earlier when I told the guys I wasn't going to tour. I wasn't going to do that no more. I was optimistic that she would get better, but meanwhile, I was just going to do my thing. I accepted that this was going to be kind of up. I went out on the 4 Unlawful Carnal Knowledge tour and I really started to mess around. I wasn't off the leash completely and I was very careful not to get caught, very careful not to bring home some infection. I wasn't reckless. I was very, very cautious. I cared about my wife. It wasn't like I didn't love her. It's just that we had grown apart. Everything else was the same. I still loved her family. I still loved our family. I even loved our lifestyle. She just couldn't stand my career, and I loved it. She was in love with horses, and I couldn't have cared less. We had become entirely different people. Once I got out there on that tour, I was partying a lot more than I ever had. I had always been pretty conservative with the partying, but once Betsy was getting better, all that changed. I'd call home at night after she was dialed in on Prozac. I'd say I was going to dinner and might not call later. "Okay," she'd say, "then call me in the morning." Free pass. I started having as much fun as a rock star could have on that tour. I had all the money in the world, all the babes a guy could want. I was having a really good time. Lead singer in the biggest rock band in the world, and I took full advantage of it. I was eating in the greatest restaurants, drinking the finest wine, flying on private jets, walking on stage to sold-out audiences going crazy for us. The only thing missing was... I don't think anything was missing. And then Carrie entered the picture. I met her at the end of the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge tour in October 1991. Every night I had been with a different woman. Our tour manager, Scotty Ross, was celebrating his birthday in Richmond, Virginia. Leffler liked him a lot and threw Scotty a party in his hotel suite. Carrie and two of her girlfriends came to the party. They were invited because her boyfriend was Buffalo Bills quarterback Jim Kelly, who knew the concert promoter. I was trying to pick up one of her girlfriends because she seemed a little more available. Carrie looked like a fun girl, really cool, good looking, but I was chasing... Betsy was home on medication. She was fixing up the house in Carmel, her dream home practically on the cliffs of Big Sur. I didn't even want to come home. When Carrie said she had to leave to go judge a beauty contest at some nightclub, Eddie and I, both trash, volunteered to go with her. We went back later to Ed Leffler's party. I was good and hammered, still trying to pick up on Carrie's girlfriend, when something we were eating fell on the floor. I looked down and saw Carrie's feet. They're like fingers, really bony, and I was thinking, gorgeous, the most long, beautiful toes I had ever seen. I looked back up. I couldn't help myself. "You really have beautiful feet," I said. When I looked up and saw her face and her eyes, I realized how beautiful she was. "You like those Cheetos?" her girlfriend said. She called her toes Cheetos. "Yes, I do," I said. "I'd eat them right now." I started trying to hit on Carrie. Everything was cool. We were having a good time just talking. At the end of the evening, at around 2 o'clock in the morning, I invited her to come to my room. "Oh no," she said. "We'll walk you to your room. You're trash. You need to get some rest. You have a show tomorrow." She and her two girlfriends walked me to my room. I opened the door and she gave me a little hug. I thought, I've wasted all this time and I'm going to bed by myself? I asked her if she wanted to go to the show the next night. "I can't," she said. "I got to take my grandmother to a wedding." The lead singer of Van Halen headlining the Hampton Coliseum, inviting her to the show, and she's not going? She's going to take her grandmother to a wedding? I dug it. She got me, right then and there. "What time are you leaving?" she said. "I'll try to make it back." I gave her my hotel alias. She called the next night. "We're hauling ass in the car," she said. "We're going to try to make it. If we don't, put our name down on the list. We're coming." They arrived just in time, and Carrie was wearing a bridesmaid dress. They went into the other room and started ripping off their clothes. I peeked. Carrie to me looked like one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen in my entire life, and I'm thinking, tonight's the night. We were backstage at the gig. Scotty Ross pushed open the dressing room door, still feeling the effects of his birthday party. "Scotty, this is Carrie," I said. "Nice to meet you," he said, and puked all over the floor. Here I was on my best rock star behavior, and this guy comes in and blows it all over my dressing room floor. She was okay with it. On the way back from the show in the back of the limo, I tried to kiss her. She gave me little pecks. I had my arm around her, and for a second, I looked at her knees. Carrie had these long, beautiful legs, skinny fingers and arms and toes. She's a slim, beautiful, smooth-skinned woman. Her knees look like they were made out of porcelain. What the... Sammy? I leaned down and kissed her knee. I put the goosebumps on her. She got them and I saw them. "That was sweet," she said. Again, I asked her back to my room. "No, I can't stay over," she said, "but I'd love to see you again." Whoa, tonight's not the night? I planted a big lip lock on her. We exchanged phone numbers, and the next day I left town with the band. About 4 days later, I called her. "If I send a plane for you, will you come and see me on my birthday?" I said. "Are you kidding me?" she said. "Of course I would. She's got to give me some now." This is getting really weird, guys. She ain't got nowhere to go. I sent a jet to pick her up. It was kind of a last-minute deal. By the time she was delivered to the gig, I was already on the stage. I saw her on the side of the stage, and my heart just started flipping and fluttering. Pow! I fell in love. I saw her, and it was just like, Shazam, there she is, my dream woman. Anything and everything, 4 or 5 times a night, and all of a sudden I bit the bait. I swallowed it. I'm in the boat now, floundering around. I came off the stage while Eddie did his solo, and instead of having 4 or 5 chicks waiting for me, I'm sitting there holding hands with Carrie like some schoolboy. I told her she was not going home, and she agreed to stay a few days. I had my Red Rocker tandem bicycle shipped out. I couldn't be away from her. When she went back, I tried to spend a week without her to test myself. I never another girl. I didn't get a blowjob. I didn't do anything, because all I wanted was her. I couldn't take it, and we were about to go home for the holidays after almost 4 months out. That was really rough. She came and spent another week on the road. I was beat up. I did not want to go home. After she spent that week with me, that was it. I was done. I was in love. I was going to go home and give it one more shot with my wife. I arrived home about 2 weeks before Christmas 1991. Betsy had her house in Carmel all fixed up. I stayed 3 or 4 days, woke up in the middle of the night, and told Betsy I had to leave. She was on medication. She told me it was okay to do whatever I wanted to do. This from Betsy, the most jealous woman in the world. This was when I wrote, "Amnesty is granted." I thought I could finally leave Betsy because she was on so much medication that she was able at last to handle it. I was never sure before. One of the reasons why I never left her earlier was that I was worried she was suicidal. I didn't want her to commit suicide because of me. I couldn't live with that. Betsy is not like other women. She does not fully belong in this world. She is harmless, vulnerable, and sensitive, but it is difficult for her to function. She can't be around pesticides. She can't eat certain foods. She is very intelligent and talented, but she is not strong in any way. Finally, one night in Carmel, I confronted Betsy. I broke down. I started crying. I told her I was going up to Mill Valley to get my head straight and figure out some stuff. She was so zonked on her tranquilizers and mood elevators that she treated it as an unremarkable event. "It's okay, honey. You just need some time. Whenever you're ready, come on back. If you have a girlfriend and you want to move back in the house with her, I'm okay with it. I don't care what you've done. It's okay." I didn't tell her I had a girlfriend, that I had fallen in love, that I had been with 75 girls a week practically, and suddenly I fell in love. I didn't know how to deal with it. I hadn't been in love in a long time. I got in my car and drove home to Mill Valley. I called Carrie and told her to come out and see me. "I just left my wife," I said. "Oh my God, that's terrible," she said. "But I'm with my grandma and my mom and dad. We're starting our Christmas ritual. I don't really think I can do this." She finally agreed, and I sent her a plane ticket. I picked her up at the airport, and we went up to the house in Mill Valley. I felt so uncomfortable. It was right before Christmas, and leaving 5-year-old Andrew was breaking my heart. Then Betsy called. She decided we needed to spend Christmas together. "We got a Christmas tree in the back of the truck," she said. "Andrew and I are going to come up. We've got a Christmas tree and a turkey, and we're driving up to Mill Valley." Betsy had this truck that I had made for her, an old 53 Chevy pickup on top of a brand new Chevy drivetrain. Betsy, the horse girl, loved the truck. It was about a 2-hour drive for her. She had not understood a word I said about leaving her. I couldn't be there when Betsy and Andrew arrived. Carrie and I jumped in the car and headed straight for the airport. First, we flew back to see her parents, where she had to apologize to her grandparents for missing Christmas. "If I'm going to do this, you're going to meet my parents," she said. "You're going to look my grandmother in the eye and say, 'I want your girl to come with me. I'm sorry. This is the first Christmas in her life she's not going to spend with you.'" We flew back to Richmond, Virginia, and I met her parents. Her stepdad was pissed off. "That son of a," I heard him say from the other room. "Who does he think he is?" We became best buddies later, but he didn't like me running away with his daughter. We took off for the Virgin Islands, a French resort called La Samana. I was hiding out. Only Leffler knew where I was. We fell in love. We stayed a month. I kept calling Betsy every few days. She did not understand that I was gone for good. She would tell me to take my time and come home when I was ready. As far as I could tell, Betsy never got her mind back together. She's very bright and sensitive, really human, and a great mother. But I sensed there was a screw loose that just wouldn't tighten back down. When I finally told her brother Bucky, his first words were, "I don't know how you did it that long." Well, that's the end of Chapter 8. Let me know what you thought of Chapter 8 in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.